This is the story of Arlington Bloggs, who didn't like children and didn't like dogs. He didn't like candies and couldn't stand cakes. And he'd get quite upset at the thought of milkshakes. He didn't like summer and walks in the sun, and he hated the winter and skating and fun. He didn't like autumn, he didn't like spring. There was nothing that Arlington liked. Not one thing. Even Christmas to Arlington Bloggs was a bore. And if he'd had his way, he'd have passed a new law making Christmas a crime. For the thought of goodwill towards others made Arlington Bloggs feel quite ill. He was friendly to no one, though some people tried to be friendly to him, but were curtly denied. He lived all by himself in a house built of logs, with a sign saying, "Private, keep out. Signed, A. Bloggs." Now, one cold winter's night, as he walked through the town, with its brightly lit windows, he stopped with a frown, for there, right before him, its lights all aglow, casting bright pools of colour on the new-fallen snow, in the middle of town, in the City Hall square, was a Christmas tree, rising up high in the air. And that miserable man gave a grunt of dismay. As he realized Christmas was not far away. "I can't stop it," he thought, though he wished that he could, and I know for a fact that if he could have, he would. For he hated this season of tinsel and trappings and packages covered with bright, shiny wrappings, and small children laughing, and carolers singing, and hearty good wishes, and jingle bells ringing. "It's all humbug," he thought, as he wended his way. "I shall just lock myself in my house Christmas Day, then I won't have to see it or hear it at all, and I simply won't answer if carolers call." And so he trudged homeward, his mind ill at ease, when his back felt the push of an icy cold breeze, which at first made him shiver. And then grew so strong that faster and faster it pushed him along. It blew round his legs and it tore through his hair. Then it suddenly lifted him into the air. He was helpless. There wasn't a thing he could do. As stronger and stronger that icy wind blew. Soon the lights of the town disappeared from his view. As faster and faster and faster he flew through the dark of the night. And again the next day, that wind blew him farther and farther away. After goodness knows how long, he saw down below a bleak, barren landscape of icebergs and snow. Then he felt the wind ease, and he slowly descended. And Arlington's journey was suddenly ended. The wind dropped completely, with nary a sound, leaving Arlington Bloggs all alone on the ground. He was frightened and hungry and cold and alone, and he couldn't remember which way he had flown. He was stranded with no idea which way to go, in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by snow. There wasn't a person or building in sight, and to make matters worse, day was turning to night. So he scooped out a hollow to use as a bed. Well, he knew that was right from a book he'd once read, and to sleep was important. He knew that much too, for tomorrow there'd be lots of walking to do. So he drew his coat round him and buttoned it tight, and he curled up in his hollow to sleep through the night. Fitfully slept as the night slowly passed, until grey dawn appeared in the distance at last. And he thought as he climbed from his bed in the snow, if I knew where I was, I'd know which way to go. For I know the sun rises up in the east, and from that I could find my direction at least. But this land is so barren, I've not seen a soul. Why, for all I know, it could be the North Pole. Then suddenly, far in the distance, he saw a tiny black speck he'd not noticed before. And as it came closer, he saw to his joy that the speck was a sled, and the driver a boy, being swiftly pulled over the snow by 4 dogs, coming nearer and nearer to Arlington BLOGGS. Then the boy gave a shout, "Whoa!" and the dogs checked their stride. And the boy and his dogs were at Arlington's side. The boy turned to him after settling the dogs, and he said,
"I assume, sir, you're Arlington BLOGGS, and you're wondering how in the world I know you when you've seemingly dropped in right out of the blue. Well, sir, it was planned that you come here this way, for tomorrow, you know, it will be Christmas Day, and we know that this time of great joy would upset you. So the wind was directed to come down and get you. It's cold and it's lonely, I know, but you won't have to look at the Christmas trees glow, and you won't have to listen to carolers singing, or hearty good wishes, or jingle bells ringing. Come, sir, there's no need to be sad. It will be the best Christmas that you've ever had. You'll be all by yourself, with no children around. Why, you won't see a soul, and you won't hear a sound."
The boy finished talking, then turned to the sled. But before he could get to it, Arlington said, You surely can't mean that you're leaving me here? I'll starve, or I'll freeze in this climate, I fear."
"I'm sorry, but you're Mr. BLOGGS, and it's well known you dislike both children and dogs. Yet you seem to imply that we take you with us. Oh, come now, be brave, sir, don't make such a fuss."
He turned once again, and he walked to the sled, while Arlington watched his departure with dread. He was wishing he'd been a bit kinder and nice, for he realized now he was paying the price. But by this time the young lad had hitched up the dogs, and he called
"Merry Christmas!"
to Arlington BLOGGS. With a shout,
"Mush! Mush!"
to the dogs, he moved over the snow, and sadly, that miserable man watched him go. "Who is he, I wonder?" he thought, as he gazed at the swirling white snow that the speeding sled raised. He knew me quite well. That's the reason he came. But he didn't remember to tell me his name. Then he heard a faint voice coming back from the sled, but the sounds from the dogs covered up what was said. Then he heard it again, rising over the noise.
I'm the spirit of Christmas in all little boys.
And then he was gone, in the blink of an eye, until all that was left was the snow and the sky, leaving Arlington Bloggs all alone once again, in the midst of that cold and unfriendly terrain. But now, as he sat all alone in the snow, he thought of the warmth of a Christmas tree's glow, and the voices of children, or puppies' bow-wow, would have been a pleasant music to Arlington now. His hunger was making his poor stomach ache. Why, he'd even have welcomed some candy or cake, though he'd always believed that such treats were no good. Well, he'd have eaten a bagful right then if he could. And he was thinking like this when he heard a small sound. Then he heard it again. And on turning around, he saw a small girl with a basket in hand, although how she got there, he could not understand.
I hope you weren't startled, but I knew you were staying up here for a while, and I had to pass by, so I dropped in to say Merry Christmas to you, for tomorrow's the day. I can't stop to chat. I've a long way to go with this basket of treats for some children I know. I've got candies and cookies and chocolates and sweets for all children you know, like a few Christmas treats.
Please stay for a while, answered Arlington Bloggs. I've not seen a soul save a boy and his dogs, and they didn't stay long. They had places to go. So couldn't you stay a few minutes or so?
Well, I could, but I thought, Mr. Bloggs, that you didn't like children or candies or dogs. Still, I'll stay for a while if you feel like a chat, but a few minutes only, no longer than that. I would offer you one of these treats, but I understand you don't like cookies or sweets. In fact, I've been told you think Christmas a bore, and if you had your way, you'd stop it by law. Still, you'll like it up here, for there won't be a sound to disturb you this Christmas. There's no one around, for this is the North Pole, and no one lives here except Santa, and he only flies once a year. He listened to all that the girl had to say. Then he said quite politely, Perhaps, if I may, I would like to taste one of those candies or cakes, for I'm feeling so hungry, my poor stomach aches. So she offered the basket, and Arlington tried a big chocolate cookie with jelly inside. And it tasted so good. He'd have asked her for more, but remembered the children the basket was for. I must go now, for it's getting quite late, and at Christmas it's hard for the children to wait. As she spoke, he could hear the wind starting to blow, and he lost sight of her in the swirling white snow. Please tell me your name, called Arlington Bloggs, before you vanish too, like the boy and his dogs. And the answer came back through the white, snowy swirls. I'm the spirit of Christmas in all little girls. And then she was gone, simply vanished from sight, leaving Arlington Bloggs to a cold, lonely night. And sadly he thought of the warmth of his fire, and the laughter of children and caroling choir, the glow from the tree in the City Hall square, all the joys of a Christmas
he wished he could share. "It's my own fault," he said, with a shake of his head, as he curled up for sleep in his cold, snowy bed. He'd been sleeping a while, but awoke as he heard a faint jingling of bells. But he thought, "That's absurd, for I know for a fact I'm the only one here." But the jingling got louder in Arlington's ear. Then all of a sudden he saw overhead a red glow in the sky and a shadowy sled. And he heard a faint voice floating over the snow.
"Pull, reindeer! Ho, 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 ho! We still have a long way to go!"
Poor Arlington Bloggs. He just stood there amazed. "Then it is true," he thought to himself as he gazed. "And he's given me just what I want, for I know if I follow that sled, that's the right way to go." So he followed the trail of the glowing red light. But the sled went too fast and was soon out of sight. Yet although he was still all alone in the snow, at least this time he knew which direction to go. He stumbled on hopefully into the night, to the spot where he'd last seen the glowing red light, when suddenly, there in the blackness, alas, he fell down the side of an unseen crevasse. He dropped like a stone, spinning round and around. And away down below was the hard, frozen ground, which was rushing to meet him, and coming so fast, poor Arlington thought he was breathing his last. He shut his eyes tight and awaited the bump. Then he hit the hard ground with a bang and a thump. But what greeted him when he opened his eyes wasn't coal, ice, and snow, but to his great surprise he saw his own room, and on turning his head realized he'd been dreaming and fallen from bed. So there'd been no North Pole and no cold, windy flight. He'd been safe in his bed all the previous night. But something had happened to Arlington Bloggs, who'd never liked ice cream, or children, or dogs. It could be that the dream that he'd had in the night had helped him to see things in a different light. For he rushed to the window and opened it wide. And he saw a small boy and his dog just outside. "Is it still Christmas Day?" he called out to the boy.
Yes, it is, sir.
He answered to Arlington's joy. "Oh, thank you kindly," said Arlington Bloggs with a grin. And he called, "Oh, Merry Christmas!" And then he went in. He got dressed just as fast as he possibly could. Then he went down to the store where the Christmas tree stood. "Oh, Merry Christmas!" he said to the man at the door. And he bought the best tree in the whole of the store. Then he spent the next hour or so planting the tree in front of his house for the children to see. He bought tree lights and tinsel and bright-colored stars and candy canes, cookies and chocolate cigars. And the townspeople thought, This can't be Mr. Bloggs. Why, he's even got bones for the children's pet dogs. Where the private sign stood just a short time ago, Merry Christmas shone merrily over the snow. And when any child passed, or just stopped in to see, he'd be given a present from Arlington's tree. Every Christmas since then, all the people agree has been just a bit better for Arlington's tree. And I have heard them say, when they've spoken about him, that Christmas just wouldn't be Christmas without him. And when it comes round, as it does every year, his wonderful tree is the first to appear, and the children all dance round the house built of logs, calling out Christmas greetings to Arlington Bloggs. And he answers each one as they pass with the call, Merry Christmas to you! Merry Christmas to all!